Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Protecting UH Research, our Spring 2022 session. This session will be recorded except for the part presented by Nina Epton. So the slide deck will be made available along with the recording on the Office of Research, the Vice President for Research and Innovation's website, and we will have the link available for you at the end of the session. Also, we will have a poll for you to indicate what things you would want more information on. And then we'll also have a survey at the end about how did you find this session? So please let us know. We want to hear your opinion so that we can constantly improve and make these sessions meaningful. I'm Jody Ito. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer, and I will be kicking this session off. But what we want to do right now is, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A. And as you enter your questions, we will see it. And then we will, as we answer it, then it will be posted and made available to everybody else who's on the session. So again, my name is Jody Ito, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Here's our agenda. So as you can see, it's going to be pretty fast paced, and the slide deck and recording will be available at the link at the very bottom. Okay. It will take us some time to go ahead and prepare the recording. So if you want, we can email the group when it's available or check back in a few days.
We're going to focus today on what are the reporting requirements specific to researchers. And this will be specifically related to both internal disclosures that need to be made to the university, as well as external disclosures to our sponsors. And so in terms of disclosures within the university, we'll talk about conflict of interest, conflicts of commitment, as well as intellectual property and invention disclosure. And then we'll go through some of the major federal agencies that Agent Epton mentioned with regard to what disclosures we need to make to our sponsors. And so just very quickly, you see here that there are several policies. We'll start with conflict of interest. On conflict of interest and how to make those disclosures, we're going to go through that fairly quickly this morning. Just keep in mind that there are several key definitions that I'd like to point out to you with regard to our conflict of interest policy. We're really talking about foreign influence and research today, so that's going to be the focus of my discussion. So we're talking about researchers, whether they're PIs, co-investigators, project directors, and any key personnel that are named on grant applications. So anyone involved in the design, conduct, or reporting of research, they all have to do conflict of interest disclosures. And so when you complete your disclosure, you need to think about not only yourself, but the financial involvement of the spouse of the UH employee, your domestic partner, as well as any dependent children. And in keeping in mind, when you answer questions about disclosures, you have to think about the context of those disclosures as they could possibly relate to your responsibilities as a UH employee. And then we're going to dig deeper into how some of those the various involvements you might have can result in what we call a significant financial interest. And so the federal definition of SFI, significant financial interest, is on the screen right now. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but we will go through the common disclosures that need to be made on our conflict of interest disclosure forms. And in pointing all this out, I want to emphasize the fact that you need to report interest not only from domestic entities, but for foreign entities as well. So when do you have to make these disclosures? You have to do it at least every 12 months. And especially at the time of proposal submission and acceptance of an award, the Office of Research Services is going to make sure that you have a valid disclosure, a current disclosure on file. And then also, if anything changes throughout the year since you submitted your disclosure, you need to update your disclosure within 30 days of acquiring any kind of financial interest. And so just want to point out that even if you do report a financial interest, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a conflict of interest. And that's something that your supervisors, as well as our office, will help assess as to whether any financial interest may actually result in a conflict of interest, which is when there's the potential for your objectivity or judgment to be biased because of that financial or other interest. And so here's a few examples of the kinds of disclosures that need to be made to the university. And so that would be, if you're a faculty member and you have a startup company that you've just recently started, if you're consulting for some kind of industry, that needs to be reported. If you have sponsored travel from a foreign entity, that needs to be reported. If you have board positions or affiliations or memberships that are outside the university, whether they're compensated or not. As Agent Epton mentioned, we need to know about foreign talent program involvement. We also need to know about things that may not necessarily be financial in nature. And that could be if a foreign entity is sending over postdocs, visiting scholars, international citizens that are there to work in your laboratory. We need to be aware of that, as well as maybe compensation, where we were mentioning this compensation from consulting services. We also need to know about whether any of your staff or students within your lab, are they involved in these external entities with you? So these are the kinds of things that we'll need to have you report on your disclosure. There are a few things that I'd like to mention that you don't have to report on. One of those things is if the travel is being sponsored by a US government entity or a US institution of higher education. We also don't need to know about mutual fund investment vehicles, retirement investment funds, where you have no direct control over what is chosen within those investment decisions. And we also don't need to know about salary and royalties from intellectual property, where UH has a right to part of that intellectual property. That's the university will already know about those because we would have a license agreement or assisted with that patent application. And in addition, we don't need to know, there is a decision point that needs to be made as to whether that could potentially be related to your responsibilities with the institution. And we rely on you to make that distinction. So for example, perhaps you may, be involved in, your kid's soccer team on the weekends, and maybe you get paid for that. If that has absolutely nothing to do with any potential relationship to the university, you wouldn't need to report those kinds of things on your disclosure form. And so it is a little complicated in terms of how to make disclosures within the university. Right now, we actually have two different disclosure forms. The reason for that is we have one that we call the Rcoi disclosure form, and that is specific for researchers that involve proposals and awards for extramural funding. And so if you're involved, if you submit grants through MyGrant, through ORS, then you need to do your disclosure in what we call the Rcoi system. Something to be aware of is you don't, even if your key personnel don't have an account in MyGrant and they don't have MyGrant access, they can still use this direct link to go straight to the Rcoi disclosure form. They don't necessarily need MyGrant in order to complete that. But they do need to complete a disclosure nonetheless. And then if there are UH employees that are not involved in research and not involved in extramural funding, then for everyone else, for all other UH employees, they would fill out we used to call it the paper or conflict of interest disclosure form. That is actually, this old paper form has been converted to a Koali Build form in the UH Koali Build platform, and we have the direct link to that on this website. Those are actually due on an annual basis on April 15th, and so we did get a lot of those recently completed. And we have a whole website on the ORC website, Conflict of Interest. If you'll look at that, it gives you a lot more detail about both of these systems and how to do your reporting. And just to point out once again that although the disclosures are due once a year. If you have any changes, you need to update your disclosure at any time when those changes occur. And ORS will be checking at the point of proposal submission and award for a valid disclosure on file. And so moving on past conflict of interest, another emphasis that the federal agencies are concerned about is the concept of conflict of commitment. And there's been a lot of discussion about how do you define a conflict of commitment, and that will continue to evolve as the focus continues to be put on commitment issues. And so as far as our definition of conflict of commitment, it's most accurately represented in our Board of Regents policy on outside employment, and how to have a record of that outside employment through Administrative Policy 9.240. And here is kind of a quote from the Board of Regents policy that although they do encourage and promote, being involved in the community and engaged in the community, whatever your outside employment should not interfere with your primary obligations to the university. And in terms of actually having a record and permission for that outside employment, there is a Form 50 on this AP 9.240 where you actually have to fill that out, describe your outside employment. It goes to your department chair, and then it goes to your dean or director. And those are actually due 1 week prior to the beginning of each semester where you're going to have outside employment. And then the last thing internally that I want to focus on in terms of disclosures is that there's invention disclosures when there's a potential for intellectual property that is involved with your research. Then you should work with the Office of Innovation and Commercialization. Contact them. You can contact them by email or through this online platform to begin a discussion about feasibility of patents and license. So please work with them when there is the potential for any intellectual property disclosures. So now I want to briefly go over disclosures that need to be made outside of the university to our sponsors. And obviously the Office of Research Services will be the ones that you go through to prepare your grant applications and have them submit those on your behalf. So in terms of any federal funding agency in general, they all have their own rules about how you submit information to them, but pay very close attention to your biographical sketches and what information they want you to include in your biographical sketch, as well as what they call current and pending or other support. Each agency is a little different, but make sure you follow their instructions very closely about what they want to know about in terms of support from other entities. Again, with many agencies, we're going to talk about some of those in more specifically, but when in doubt, always report that, and that goes for disclosures to the university as well. So let's talk a little bit about NIH. They have been really, in my mind, at the forefront of the cases that have come forward about undue foreign influence in university research. And that started back in late 2018, early 2019, when NIH was sending letters to grantees about the concerns they had about foreign influence. And so an excellent website to go to with NIH is this link here, Protecting US Biomedical Intellectual Innovation. And on that website, I actually found the latest report from March of this year, which said that they have investigated over 230 cases. And of those cases, many of which are still active, 80% of these cases involve at least one serious compliance violation. And a compliance violation is a failure to disclose those things that we talked about: involvement from foreign entities in grants, talent awards, patents, and other conflicts of interest. And so there is still continues to be a very huge emphasis on this with NIH. And so please look at that website. On that website as well, I just took a snapshot of part of this table, but it's extremely helpful. It talks about which part of a grant application or where do you report things like affiliations with foreign entities. You report that on the bio sketch. Where do you report other support? You do it at just in time on the other support page, as well as annual progress reports. So this is a very helpful place to kind of quickly look at where do I report various involvement with other entities. And just want to point out, there's also this notice 19-114. And this is a reminder about other support and obligations to report those. And very quickly, again, specific to NIH, they view current and pending as all support from all resources outside of your university employment. And that would include salary, honorary appointments, adjunct appointments at a foreign university, as well as non-monetary support, like we mentioned before, having somebody work in your lab from a foreign entity, or donations of equipment and things of that nature. And in terms of when to report, typically with NIH, it's done at just in time, right before an award is made. And then anytime you add key personnel, and at the time of annual progress reports, those things need to be updated. And so you need to check with your key personnel as those situations might change. And in terms of if there's foreign collaborators on your grant, you have to have prior approval from NIH for foreign involvement. And the latest change from NIH, and that actually became effective January of this year, they are now requiring within the other support done at just in time, they want copies of grants and contracts with foreign entities. And so if these, and typically these would not be contracts for the universities involved. And so that means that you would need to provide those through your other support. It goes through ORS and it's ultimately submitted to NIH. If these contracts are not in English, we would need to provide whoever had the contract would need to provide a translated copy to English. And so just want to point that out. Moving on to NSF. Similarly, they have also had a very active focus on foreign influence in research. And there was a recent article that NSF has over 100 active cases that they're looking into right now. So again, same kind of concept as NIH, be very careful to look at the requirements for current and pending. They also make it clear that there are specific requirements for biosketches that must now follow NSF approved formatting. Moving on to NASA. NASA for many years, since 2011, has had this restriction on bilateral on agreements with China. So be aware that for many years that has actually been a restriction. And then finally, we have Department of Energy, and is in terms of foreign talent programs, they strictly prohibit involvement of our employees in foreign talent programs. So that's kind of a very quick overview of disclosure requirements. As Jody mentioned, this recording will be on our Foreign Influence and University Research website. We do update that regularly with new information that we get from the various federal agencies that sponsor our research. So, that's a good resource for you. Also, the research compliance website and our conflicts of interest website. We have a contact for conflict of interest. You can email coi@hawaii.edu for questions about conflicts of interest. With that, do we have any questions?
Yeah, there are two questions in the Q&A. So I'll read them to you and you can answer them live. So first question is, do Fulbright scholars who travel abroad need to report this as a significant financial interest?
If the Fulbright scholar, I'm not as familiar with these programs, but if it went through the university, then no. But if it didn't go through the university, I think I'd err on the side of caution and go ahead and report that. Okay.
So I guess my takeaway is better to over-report than
under-report. I would always, or check with us if you're not really sure. Check with us. Yeah.
Okay. And then the second question is, which, if any, of these forms would apply to retired faculty? This person has the official status of Professor Emeritus and is planning to write several books and project proposals.
Okay. That's a good question. So in terms of who can serve as a PI on university research, the university does allow emeritus as well as adjunct faculty to serve as PI. And so the same rules would apply for any principal investigator. So long story short, yes, you would need to make disclosures.
All right, thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions? Feel free to throw them into the chat. I'm sorry, into the Q&A, and then we'll continue to answer them as we continue with the presentation. All right, so thank you very much, Victoria. That was really, really good. I learn something new every time we do these things. Okay, so Sandra, if you can bring up the slide deck again. And then we're gonna continue with my part. I'm gonna request remote control. Hang on one second. Okay, and we're gonna continue on with research-related threats, regulations, and compliance. So Victoria was very specifically talking more about the disclosure and conflict of interest and conflict of commitments. And so I'm gonna come at it from the cyber side. So what I want to do now is talk about some of the incidents that has happened very recently here in Hawaii. Tail end of last year, there was this article where the bus and handy van was attacked, and it's still an ongoing investigation, but they suspect it's affiliated with Russia and that it was a ransomware attack. They did not pay the ransom as far as I know, but again, this is still an ongoing investigation. So a lot of these slides will have links so that you can actually get to the article itself. But this is really to highlight that attacks are going on here in Hawaii, and it's very current. This is another one that occurred, the actual attack occurred in 2020. Specifically, while not here in Hawaii, it was targeting research. And it really cost Michigan State University more than $1 million to recover from it. And what happened here was there's an organization called Trusted CI, which is an NSF-funded initiative, and they are the Cyber Infrastructure Center of Excellence. And they went through and did an analysis of it. And really, this is to highlight that research is targeted, and it destroyed more than a year's worth of research. And these are the types of things that can happen here. We actually do have preludes to ransomware attacks. We have intervened in several of them, but really it's an indicator that we all need to be very vigilant and pay attention to all of these things, because each one of us can help to protect our entire infrastructure, as well as all of our research projects. So ransomware is prevalent in this particular article. It talks about over 4,200 ransomware victims. And then this is sort of the ransomware attacks by months, as this company was pulling together the stats. Looks like the ransomware attackers sort of took a holiday around Christmas time. But really, it just shows to prove that ransomware is a very lucrative way for the cyber criminals to earn money. So always be on alert. And we from information security, we constantly are monitoring things. And if we come to you and say, hey, we think that one of your computers or servers are compromised, please take it seriously and go and investigate it. We need your eyes and ears to help us protect the university's infrastructure. The other thing that we're seeing is third-party and supply chain risks. What this means, it's other companies that we're dependent on, or other software developers that we're dependent on that is attacked, but then also could put us at risk. So again, this is the tail end of last year. There was a ransomware attack which affected Board of Water Supply and Emergency Medical Services. But what happened here is a third-party payroll and timesheet provider, right? Kronos was attacked by ransomware, and it actually disrupted paychecks and timesheets for people here in Hawaii. So I believe what happened was some paychecks were delayed, and or they were estimates regarding how many hours people actually worked. So again, the things that we have to look out for are companies that we rely on and that are attacked. So when we tell you in the data governance program, for example, we ask, well, what software products? Is it a third-party vendor? What kind of security plan do they have? These incidents are the reasons why we're asking these questions. We're trying to understand where the university's personal information or other high-risk data is being maintained. And this also goes to any of the research projects that are using third-party software and software developers. In this particular instance, this was a security company that provides security tools, and they were attacked. And this company was actually used very predominantly in a lot of federal governments as well as critical infrastructure. And it really was an eye-opening incident that showed how vulnerable we can be because we're so dependent on third parties and software developers and things beyond our direct control. Other things we're finding, and this is earlier this year, is this is a software framework, right? So Log4j is how it's pronounced, and it's Apache, and it was heavily used by a number of other products. So again, it's a software framework, and other people build upon it. So this was done earlier this year, and we also had one more similarly called Spring Shell. And so what's hard about these is we don't exactly know where these frameworks are being used by other third-party vendors. And so it's hard for us to, from the information security side, to let you know what you need to be aware about. And so when we send out broad alerts, if you're not the one that's responsible for the IT infrastructure within your departments or your research project, please check with the people who may know. And this may involve going out to your colleagues in other institutions who may be using similar software products, because collectively we have to try to track these things to be able to understand the risks to ourselves. And then in this case, this was a ransomware group that had breached a company called Okta. And what happened here is Okta is an identity and management and authentication company. And a lot of companies use Okta for their login services. So while it was a ransomware attack on Okta, when I looked at this, is only a very small partial list of the companies that have used Okta services. So I'm looking at this list, I go, well, we have Adobe, we have Workday, we have Elucia, we have Zoom, people are using GitHub, we have Cengage. So looking at this list is we are very vulnerable to the breach or the infiltration or security incident that occurred with Okta. And again, we try to stay abreast of these things, but because this technology and network and security landscape is so complex, it's really difficult, but we'll do our best. But we also rely on you with your eyes and ears, because you may have information coming into you from other channels. So very specifically about things that we're seeing here is we're still getting malware infected email that contains very malicious payloads. So earlier this year, we sent out an alert, which we very rarely do. We sent it out to announce to everyone within the university. But basically, it was a malware infected document that was attached to email, and then it would actually lead to ransomware. And we're still seeing the "Are you available?" phishing campaigns. And that at the bottom, they know who you are and who you work with. So in fact, just earlier this week, there was a phishing campaign via email that was impersonating the president of the university, but it was targeting his leadership. Right? So very specifically, they know who reports to who, they know the relationships that exist among us, and then they will try to leverage that to try to infiltrate and get you to become infected with malicious software. And then from there, they'll try to navigate and try to infect either more people, more devices, perhaps conduct ransomware or exfiltrate personally identifiable information. And they may also try to do that to get to their specific target. Attackers are patient and they're very crafty. So in this particular instance, this was a phishing email impersonating a UH researcher. In this case, if you open up the email with the Gmail interface, it will actually flag it and it will say that it looks like it's coming from here, from someone here at the University of Hawaii. But if you reply to it, it will send it to someone else in another domain. So they're telling avoid replying to it. So what we're seeing is Google is doing a much better job about trying to identify suspicious emails. So pay attention to these types of warning messages that you may see within our Gmail interface. We're also seeing, and this is from other higher education institutions, that attackers were starting to become successful at bypassing Duo. Yes, we tell you to use Duo so that you can have multi-factor authentication to protect your UH accounts. But again, the attackers are getting better, and that they're sending a phishing email that's directing the user to a fake single sign-on page. And the single sign-on page looks exactly like the institution's login page. But in our case, for the University of Hawaii, our authentication page is housed on a hawaii.edu site. Okay? So in this particular phishing email attack, the victims would enter their username and password. And then on the next page, they were prompted for a dual passcode twice. So they enter a dual passcode once, it redirects them, asks them for a second dual passcode. And at the end of this attack, the attackers now have their account password and then 2 dual passcodes that they then subsequently tried to use to change direct deposit banking information. So right now, our UH dual passcodes do not expire, but we are looking at rethinking our strategy about that. So those of you that are familiar with our login page, make sure that it's pointing to authn.hawaii.edu. If it goes to any other website, do not enter any of your information and let us know immediately. So yes, we do have to be vigilant in many, many ways. It's like when you build a better mousetrap, the mice get smarter. The attackers are getting much, much better at their craft. And phishing is primary methods that our attackers are using to bypass all of our security controls. Once they can get you to respond to an email and you're letting them in, you're letting them through the firewall, you're allowing them to install software on your computers. So this is why it's so successful and they keep using phishing. Right? This is for you. Just go ahead and try to go do some of these exercises. We won't know about it. There is no penalties, but it really is just a good reminder that we should practice to try to identify phishing emails. We're still seeing credential stuffing attacks, and this is where the attackers are using usernames and passwords that were stolen from other websites to try to log into your UH account. So we find that there's a lot of people here at the University of Hawaii that use their UH email addresses on other services. Hopefully you are not using the same password on those other services that you are using here at UH. And so we are still finding that people are doing that and that people are having their accounts compromised because of it. So if you find that your UH password was used somewhere else on another service and that service was breached, never reuse that password again, period. And if your UH credential was compromised on another site, please make sure that you verify that the password is different or that you should just go ahead and change your UH password anyway. This has actually happened tail end of last year. We had a malicious attacker gain access to a UH account. And then we could see that they logged into my UH and they went to the payroll pay stub so that they can look at how much money is involved. They changed some of the emergency alert settings, and they changed the owner of departmental usernames. So once an attacker can gain access to your UH account, that means they can sign in with your credentials to any UH service. So for example, they would be able to sign in to the Hawaii Information Portal, where they can attempt to try to change your direct deposit. We are protecting that site. You have to have multi-factor authentication before you can sign in to the Hawaii Information Portal. But again, they're getting better at trying to attempt to bypass multi-factor. Okay. So continuing on with this scenario, the malicious attacker then logged into the person's actual email account. And then they were able to successfully do password resets for the UH Credit Union, RCOH, and Amazon. And then the real user finally contacted us at ITS a day later. So really, you do need to pay attention to your credentials and where they're being used, and make sure you have very strong passwords and that you have multi-factor authentication turned on in as many places as possible. We're still seeing cryptocurrency mining, and we have a lot of compute resources here at the University of Hawaii. So two things with this: it's in violation of UH policy, and the second thing is, if this is occurring on your research systems or any systems, it now calls into question the integrity and your cybersecurity practices, which could lead to additional investigations, especially if your servers and computers are being used to conduct your research. Okay, it's all about making sure that you can protect all of our resources. And then really quickly, I'm just going to fly through all of these research-related regulations. Nina and Victoria talked a little bit about these. It's the federal government. They are looking at security around research. This is the National Security Policy Memo, I believe. And what it is, it's going to have specific requirements that we at the University of Hawaii have to address. So we're going to need to stand up a security program specifically for research. And as you know, it encompasses just more than cybersecurity. And so these are some of the things that we've extracted from that report. And you can read that guidance. The link is at the bottom of this slide. We talked a little about NIH. And NIH actually has specific information about, yes, you must protect sensitive data and information as it's used in research. And I'm almost sure that we will see much more prescriptive requirements coming from all of the federal agencies and all of the sponsoring organizations. This one is a little troubling to me, is that because the Department of Justice will now be able to investigate and apply penalties to you if we are found to be lacking in our disclosures around our security controls. So specifically, it says the initiative holds entities accountable if we knowingly provided deficient cybersecurity products or services and misrepresented our practices and protocols. Okay. And I just found this is now they have a settlement based on this civil cyber fraud initiative. So if you want to read more about what went on there, the link to the article is there. So it's not just about having regulations, it's about being penalized if we are found to be in violation of those regulations. We still have the National Defense Authorization Act 889, which says that we cannot be using any covered telecommunications equipments or services. And in this particular NDA 889, it says we cannot be using video surveillance or telecommunications equipments from Huawei, ZTE, Hytera, Hangzhou, Hikvision, and Dahua, or any of their subsidiaries or affiliates. Also, this has been in effect from 2018, NDAA 1634. We cannot be using any sorts of products or services from Kaspersky Lab. That is a Russian company, and this has come up especially because of the Ukrainian-Russian war that is currently going on. It's a reminder that we need to pay attention to all of these things and keep it in the forefront as we go out and procure products and services. FAR is our basic safeguarding, which is 15 controls, not all technical controls. It talks about securing federal contract information. And we anticipate that this will become a baseline standard for all federal identified information. So federal contracting information or covered contract information systems. So we're still unpacking a lot of these things as to how would we at the University of Hawaii apply this much more broadly than just around research information. So for those of you following the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification initiatives, this FAR 5220421 is actually CMMC level 1 in version 2. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in depth. So if you want to have us go and do more in-depth dives into some of these regulations, please let us know in our surveys. Going through really quickly, these are some of the other federal regulations that come into play, or especially around research from defense. So this is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations. And then we're just seeing there's more federal scrutiny on all of these things. So please make sure that you're engaging with your IT staff around these sort of compliance and regulatory requirements as they come up. You might see them pop up in your contract language or your sponsoring organization, or it could be a flow down if you're a subcontractor or a sub-award. And this is where we're seeing it come up. The other thing that needs to happen is if there is a requirement for you to comply with NIST 800-171 and complete the self-assessment, we need a score that would need to be input into the supplier performance risk system. So we call these SPRs. And these scores would need to be entered before the contract can be awarded. So you need to monitor your systems and networks, be on the lookout for activities that violate UH policy, and then make sure your disclosures are current. And those are links to a couple of other articles that talk about how these investigations are becoming a lot more prevalent. And I just found this today in an email. So there was some chatter tail end of last year that says, okay, they're going to discontinue the China initiative, which is really looking at a lot of the foreign influence related to China. But from just last week, it says that, nope, China is still being identified as being a huge threat related to espionage. So, you know, this is just more as a heads up to you as to what's going on from the federal government side. Real quickly, I'm going to talk about the minimum security standards. So this is where we at UH have come up with security requirements based on the type of data that it's classified as. So we have the data classification categories, and basically anything classified as sensitive or regulated, meaning that it has some privacy or regulatory requirements around that data. You need to protect it in accordance with the standards that we have established. We are coming up with more readable type of information where it's not so much applied to the CIS controls, but we're saying things like if you need to do whole disk encryption on your device and you're using Microsoft 10, you can use BitLocker, and then it tells you how to do it. So we're trying to make the information around the minimum security standards much more usable. Okay, so be on the lookout for more information and webinars around this. And then real quickly, I'm going to talk about some of the non-UH research resources. So I mentioned earlier the Trusted CI, which is a National Science Foundation funded project where they are the Cybersecurity Center of Excellence for Research. There's a lot of good information out there. And in fact, through the Trusted CI and that next bullet item, the Research SOC, there are projects here at the university that are taking advantage of that expertise. So for example, Trusted CI and Research SOC is assisting with the affiliated research, the academic research fleet, ARF, to help improve their cybersecurity posture. They have also undertaken engagements with the Gemini Observatory, and they are going to be doing an engagement with NOR Labs. So again, these are all funded projects where these resources are helping to improve the security posture of their programs. So from the Trusted CI perspective, what I have here is a slide deck, and under the resources, it just goes through and lists some of the different types of information that you can gather to help you. So we're talking about things related to science gateways or trustworthy data working groups, right? So these are all places where you can get additional information. The other one that I stumbled upon very recently is the Department of the Air Force Chief Information Security Office. They have a Blue Cyber Education series. And while they say it's for small businesses, they are actually opening this up to academic and research institutions also. Just from their website, these are just some of the topics that you can look at. These are their recordings of videos that they've done, as well as the PowerPoint presentation slide decks. And then the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, they're putting together a lot of resources that we can leverage to help protect our environments. So tons of information. NIH is also throwing up things around their data sharing website, around their data. And this is something that I just got off an email today, is that they're also hosting workshops on protecting genomic data. So you can sign up for this. This is coming up in May. And that's all I have. So I'm going to turn it over to Sandra.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Sandra Ferruto, and I'm the Director of Data Governance. So in my section, we'll be talking about the different activities around data governance, which is really around management of data. So a lot of the work that we do involves the creation of policies and procedures around data privacy and data security. So the main goal of UH's data governance program is to protect the privacy and security of what we refer to at UH as protected data, which we define as data that's not considered public and therefore has no privacy considerations. And therefore has privacy considerations. Other data governance goals are to protect and produce better quality data for better decision-making, promote efficiencies, and increase transparency and accountability, both internally and externally. There is two broad buckets of protected data at UH: institutional data, which is data used in our day-to-day business and academic operations. So we're talking primarily about student, HR, and financial types of data. The second bucket of data is data created, collected, or analyzed for research. At UH, we have 4 data classification categories defined in Executive Policy 2.214 that categorizes how to treat data by level of sensitivity. We have a public category, which involves data with no restrictions around access. Student directory information and employees' business contact information are considered public data and have no privacy considerations. When we refer to protected data, we're talking about the next 3 categories: restricted, sensitive, and regulated. Restricted data is used for internal purposes and is not for distribution to external parties without some kind of a memorandum of agreement or contract in place. Student contact information and UHID number are examples of restricted data. Sensitive data involves data subject to privacy considerations. So birth date, payroll information, most student information fall under this category. Additionally, research projects collecting highly personal responses from study participants on topics such as illegal activities, addiction, sex, housing, or food insecurity are considered sensitive. The regulated category involves data with the highest level of sensitivity. So data like first name or first initial and last name in combination with social security number, driver license number, or bank account information, credit card information, or HIPAA or FAFSA, or financial aid data, are in the regulated category. These are data elements that, if exposed, have some kind of repercussion to the university, which could be in the form of fulfilling a formal breach notification requirement to the state legislature or the federal government, or the assessment of financial fines. For research projects, we mostly encounter health-related data in this category, and occasionally the collection of social security numbers for individuals receiving gift cards for participation in research studies. Here are more examples of the types of data within each data classification category. The list can be found in attachment 1 of EP 2.214. The public category carries no risk and includes, again, student directory information such as name, major, class level, etc. These, again, data elements have no data privacy types of considerations under FERPA. As government employees, we have data that is deemed public as well, like our name and job information. These data elements are specified in Hawaii Revised Statutes, Chapter 92F-12. The restricted category with the green header is considered low risk. Again, these are data freely used within the university for our internal purposes without restriction, but we do not release this information without some kind of agreement with third parties. This restricted category was specifically added to protect our students' contact information from third-party marketers who often ask for contact information for the entire student body. So because student contact information is not considered public, we're able to deny these open records requests. Sensitive is our default category and carries some risk. Most student information are considered sensitive. As employees, your personal information are also considered sensitive. Likewise, we classify personal information of non-UH individuals as sensitive. For surveys, again, collecting responses on highly personal topics are sensitive. And also, we consider sensitive our default category. So if you do come across a data element that you're not quite sure where it fits, for example, it might straddle the line between restricted and sensitive, then we ask that you take a conservative approach and treat it as sensitive. And you can always feel free to contact us as well if you have any questions. And finally, the data elements in the regulated category are considered high risk because they're tied to external compliance requirements. And if there's an exposure of that data, as I mentioned earlier, there may be significant repercussions for the university. As a side note, generally, the data we're concerned with are personally identifiable information, or PII. But every so often, we come across non-people data that may be considered sensitive and potentially harmful if it lands in the wrong hands. For example, organizational charts have become much more sensitive in nature because they provide a wealth of information on relationships, as Jody had mentioned earlier, for potential phishing attacks. Or building plans detailing power sources or security layouts may not be something we'd want out there publicly. So although our data classification categories primarily focus on PII, they can occasionally extend to non-personal data as well. The following are things to consider when working with your data. Know what type of data you're responsible for and know what data classification categories they fall under. More often than not, your records will contain data elements from more than one data classification category. So protect your records according to the data element with the highest level of sensitivity. Also, consider all data involved in your project, which may include multiple data sets. For example, we've seen projects that require analysis of a de-identified data set. Another component of the project is to collect PII through surveys and focus groups. Each project component needs to be managed and properly secured according to the varying levels of sensitivity and risk. Another point to consider is that your data may change throughout your project's lifecycle. You may be collecting PII, which is sensitive, but after you strip the de-identifiers, your de-identified data set becomes low risk. At a later point, if you add back the identifiers, that increases the sensitivity of your data set again. So remember to look at your data holistically, not just at one point in time. Your security requirements may not stay the same, and you may need to adjust how you secure your data throughout the life of your project. We have a data governance process, or DGP, that your research projects may be subject to, depending on what data is involved. A DGP is required for projects that generally involve protected data and applies to both institutional and research data. As part of the DGP, we're tracking where data is coming and going to better understand how our community uses data. We're looking at protecting the data on a security level by reviewing how data is being safeguarded. We're also looking at legal aspects to ensure that our agreements with other third parties have appropriate language to protect the university. The process also focuses on information sharing and provides advance notice to our data and IT providers who may need to be involved in the project. And finally, the process gives us a way to assess risk. The higher the level of sensitivity of the data involved, the higher the risk. And as a result, we require more stringent security and legal provisions in place to protect the data, our people, and the university as a whole. We're often asked why we have to do a DGP in addition to the IRB. The reason is that although both deal with research data and are compliance driven, we look at data through different lenses. IRB is looking at protecting individuals from harm, while the DGP process is all about the data. It's about data privacy and data security with the goal of reducing the risk of exposure of personally identifiable information. So when is a DGP required? There are 4 criteria for research activities. The first is if your project deals with health information. This includes both identified and de-identified health data. So a COVID study or telehealth services would apply. So would the transfer of de-identified data sets to partner institutions. The second criteria is if you're collecting social security numbers, even if you're collecting only the last 4 digits of the SSN. Or it could be you're collecting birth dates, so that's month, day, and year. If you can use age or month and year or month and day instead of full birth date, it would be less sensitive and would not require a DGP. The third instance is if you're using student data that was originally collected or issued by UH for institutional purposes. In other words, this data is related to the student's education. These may be student contact information or GPA or course information. So if you're using an email list to solicit participation or even the UH announced feature, a DGP is required. And although student contact information is low risk, administrators pay close attention because of concerns about survey fatigue. And the last criteria for research-related DGPs is if you're collecting PII as part of conducting surveys, interviews, focus groups, or observations on highly sensitive topics, which I had mentioned earlier. And oftentimes, number 3 and number 4 often go hand in hand when working with UH students as study participants. If your project meets any of the 4 criteria, you would fill out the DGP form in QualiBuild. When you fill out the form, you'll be asked to submit any proposed unsigned documents, such as a vendor contract or a draft data use agreement. We're also asking for IRB approval letters, if applicable, and any other supporting materials. My office does an initial review. We may go back and forth with the requester to get a better picture of what the project involves. And then once we get a better understanding, the GGP goes to the appropriate subject matter experts for review. Then it routes to our VP for IT, Garrett Yoshimi, who looks at the request from the 30,000-foot level in terms of risk and resource requirements. It also comes to me to ensure that everything looks okay. Then we send an FYI to the relevant vice chancellor or vice provost at the campuses involved. After all the approvals are done, the program can proceed with the agreement and procurement. The time frame for this process is about a week if we have all of the information we need. And we do encounter delays in times, and it's often because we're missing information, or there may be issues with terms in your agreement or vendor contract. And so what we often see are three main things: indemnification clauses, and governing law and binding arbitration. So we're often told, well, we're not lawyers, we don't know this stuff. Well, we are not either, but we've learned to identify that these 2 or 3 non-compliant terms have issues around them, and because they may have potential legal and financial impacts on you, the program, and the university as a whole. So remember that you as a program will be making a commitment on behalf of the university by entering into the agreement. So it's important you understand what you're committing to. So if you do recognize that there are any of these issues in your contract or agreement, we will help you with that when you submit your DGP. If you do not require a DGP, but you notice that it is in there, you can also contact OGC, who can also help you with that. Let's see. And it has been our experience that vendors with signed contracts are generally more willing to negotiate their terms. There are instances where we're not as successful, and these tend to involve low-cost, low-risk purchases of software or subscriptions. Here at UH, there's a waiver process that notates the existence of problematic indemnification governing law and binding arbitration language, which has been a long-standing issue for many of our small purchases. So if you see this, and there's these are things like Adobe or Microsoft products that are not part of the ITS site license that you want to buy, or you're renewing a Qualtrics subscription, which doesn't include any data, it's just a pure renewal. For these types of purchases, you may be told by your fiscal administrator to complete this waiver at the link at the bottom of this slide. And then I want to also mention that we have a mandatory information security awareness training at UH, where all employees, including student and graduate assistants and RCUH and UH employees are subject to. So far, 9 campuses, the UH Foundation, and some VP offices have established compliance coordinators and monitoring. If you are an RCUH employee, you should be receiving an announcement in the coming weeks about the ISAT requirement. We still need to work on onboarding Manoa, the remaining system VP offices, and student assistants in the coming months. So this is it's a slow rollout that we are doing. And the training requirement is annual, takes less than an hour to complete. It's in La Lima. You are asked to take it annually on or before your anniversary date. You may receive an automated email or a reminder from your ISAT compliance coordinator. And we realize this is one more compliance requirement, but we did try and make it short and sweet. We are implementing this for all employees to better position ourselves to meet the increasing federal requirements and to reduce the risk of data breaches and exposures as we deal with the growing sophistication of our cybersecurity criminals. And so we as a university need to up our game. Okay. And then now I'm gonna turn it over to Jody.
Okay, so thank you very much. What we're gonna do now is to throw up a poll. And so please respond. We want to know if you need information about any of these topics. So yeah, your poll should be up now. It's a multiple choice, so please go ahead and select all of the different things that you're interested in. And what we'll do also is if there are other subjects not listed here, please put that in on the survey that will be displayed after we end this webinar. So we're going to keep it up for a little while more. And again, what we'll do is develop these workshops and trainings and then announce it either through the announce mechanism or on the data governance and information security websites. Okay. And if you do have any other questions for any of us, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A. I know we're at time right now. So let's see, I'm gonna, Sandra, ask you this question. It's in the Q&A now. To clarify, for the OVP IT waiver, do they need to provide information on binding arbitration in addition to indemnification and laws of other entities?
Yes, we are, binding arbitration doesn't seem to pop up as often, but we were told by ODC that was also a third area that we should consider. So yes, if you do notice binding arbitration, it would be very helpful if you include it in the waiver as well. Thank you.
Okay, and I've just ended the poll. So it does seem that there's a lot of interest in all of the topics that we had listed. So look forward to seeing, yeah, you should be able to find more information about those as we develop them. We probably won't do anything in the summer since most people take off or are focused on other projects, but look to, yeah, we'll look to try and make these available in the fall. So, okay. All right, Sandra, next slide. All right, so that's our contact information. So again, if you have any other questions, please let us know. We will hang around for a couple more minutes. So if you have any other Q&As, and again, we will make the slides and recording available. And please fill out the survey because the survey again will help us to improve. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope that you found the information valuable, and we will be doing this again in the fall with updated information. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.